So y'all know that I'm from Florida. Texas actually is near and dear to me, but Texas is also one of those states that likes to say, hold my beer when it comes to all sorts of crazy gerrymandering and redistricting. And let me correct myself right now, because gerrymandering is bad. Redistricting is okay. But redistricting is only supposed to happen every decade after a census is done to be able to gauge population growth and to determine what's kind of the changes that we've seen in the population. Texas is now trying to do something as blessed by the Trump administration. The Trump DOJ, as you've heard here at the Katie Phang News Channel and on my other social media platforms, sent a letter to Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, saying that there were all sorts of violations of the Voting Rights Act and violations of voter laws when it pertains to 5 specific congressional districts in Texas. And as a result, Abbott calling a special session to be able to be launched just yesterday to address a number of issues, but one of which is to deal with a redistricting of at least 5 congressional districts. And so who better than to get us all of the inside baseball when it comes to congressional Texas politics, but Congressman Joaquin Castro from the great state of Texas. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Yeah. And thank you for shedding some light on this and covering it, because it is a huge deal and, obviously could impact Democrats' ability to take back the House of Representatives in 2026.
Yeah. And so let's be explicitly clear. Part of the reason why I want to highlight this is I do think that it needs to be more in the public discourse right now, because it is a brazen and naked power grab that has been blessed again by the DOJ. The DOJ kind of giving legal and political cover to Republicans basically stealing 5 congressional seats from the state of Texas from otherwise that would still continue to be represented by Democrats. And let me be clear, one of those seats is the 18th congressional district, where we had Barbara Jordan and Sheila Jackson Lee. I mean, we've had some powerhouses that have come from these districts. And so, Congressman, what I wanted to get into was just straight out of the gate, the ridiculousness, which is, has anybody even seen the proposed maps? Has anybody even seen what the Republicans say are going to be the proposed redrawn maps?
No, in fact, the Republicans haven't even seen the maps. The Republican Congress members from Texas haven't seen the maps. Probably 99% of the state legislators, even the Republicans, haven't seen the maps, because the maps are going to come from the White House. They're literally going to come from the White House. The White House is telling the Texas legislators, this is the map that you're going to use. This is what I want passed. And it's Donald Trump. And, Katie, I was a freshman state legislator representing part of San Antonio, my hometown, in 2003, the last time they did this, mid-decade redistricting. And back then, we left the state to go to Ardmore, Oklahoma, to stop this thing. And the state Senate we went for like 4 days. The state Senate went for 34 days or something. And we delayed them, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months. But ultimately, they stole some of those congressional districts. They redrew the map. And, and there's never been balance since. It's no secret that Texas over the last generation has tended to vote more conservative. If you look at the results of the statewide elections, although I do think that Texas officials make it harder for people to vote than in a lot of other states. But, right now, even without this mid-decade redistricting, the map is 2-1 Republican to Democrat in terms of members of Congress. They're trying to make it 3 or 4-1 at this point. So it really is a kind of theft, a stealing of representation and a stealing of these Democratic districts. And as you mentioned, the people who are going to pay the price are in these black and brown districts that are getting completely convoluted, and, they're just going to jute out in all sorts of different directions. It's really going to be a crazy map.
Yeah, so I love relying upon numbers because those are objective, right? You cannot manipulate. Well, I take it back. They can be manipulated, but numbers don't lie. So let's go to these numbers. The 2020 census, and that year is going to be very important for our conversation, Congressman. The 2020 census showed, and this is from the Texas Trib, which is one of my absolute favorites, that Texas's population grew by nearly 4 million people, and 95% of that growth was made up of people of color in blue urban areas. And if I may take a point of personal privilege here, in Houston, one of my favorite cities in Texas, the population growth was concentrated in Asian American voters. And yet the AANHPI, the Asian American community, we don't even have representation when it comes to these congressional districts, even though we constitute a plurality in any of the 3 Houston-based congressional districts. And the reason why I bring this up to you is when this census was done in 2020, 2021, there was litigation over it. It's still pending in federal court 5 years later. But what's crazy is the Republicans drew those maps, and yet now those are the maps that are suddenly illegal.
No, that's absolutely right. Well, first, a few things that are astonishing, that the maps are drawn 2-to-1. So they're already heavily gerrymandered. You're right. The Asian American population is actually in Texas, the population that's been growing the fastest for several years now, and yet has no representation. And that's going to get set back here as well, right? Yep. So you have communities that are going to be targeted, the Asian American community, the Latino community, the African American community, when, as you mentioned, for the last few decades, 90 or let's say 80+% of the growth over the last, probably since the turn of the century, has been in those 3 communities. And yet they're not gaining any ground. In fact, now they're going to be losing ground. So it really is just a tragedy what's going on. And yet, Donald Trump is ordering this to happen. And let's be clear about something. The reason he's doing this, he doesn't want Democrats to take back control of the House of Representatives. And it's not just the usual Republicans and Democrats fighting with each other. This man doesn't want any investigations on things like releasing the Epstein files, on the corruption, all the crypto corruption, his meme coin or stable coin or whatever he's got, the different kind of insider deals that they're doing over there. All of it. Doesn't want the Senate or the House to investigate anything that his administration is doing. And as you know, right now, Mike Johnson and Thune over in the Senate, they don't hold the administration accountable for anything. There's no hard investigations about anything going on with Donald Trump, with the cabinet secretaries, with anything in the administration. And Donald Trump wants to keep it that way.
So you mentioned that when you were just a freshman state rep back in, what was it, 03?
2003, yeah.
Which feels like it was just yesterday. You're so young. So here's the thing. So, but you did what, so I had the privilege of spending time with Isaiah Martin, who you may know. He's running actually for Congress in the 18th. And he got arrested. He got forcibly detained, shoved to the floor, and arrested during public comments at a hearing just a few days ago, last week. But the reason why Isaiah and I were speaking was specifically because of this Texas redistricting issue. But he talked about something called a quorum break. So you were just saying that you took a little trip to Oklahoma, as did some Texas state senators. And listen, Isaiah's been a proponent of this. He says, look, let's go to Illinois. Let's go to California, right? Let's go to the same places in the United States and maybe see if we can delay this. But I mean, realistically, is this a plan that you think could actually work?
Well, yeah, I think, back then in 03, we went to Oklahoma. Believe it or not, at that time, Oklahoma still had a Democratic governor. And I'm not sure if the legislature was Democrat. It may have been. Now, the surrounding states, Louisiana, Oklahoma, obviously are pretty solidly Republican. And so, yeah, the state legislators now are considering the same thing, whether they will have to do a quorum break and leave the state to try to stop what we believe is an illegal mid-decade gerrymandering, redistricting. And, but what's changed, some of the considerations going on since 2003, what the Republicans in the legislature did after the quorum breaks in 2003 and then on voting rights in 2021, they added a $500 a day penalty for the state legislators when they break quorum, and also added language in the House rules, I believe, that allude to the ability to expel somebody for purposely breaking quorum like that. And so I know those are some of the considerations that the legislators are going through. I think that it could be effective in really dialing up the heat and making Republicans decide in Texas whether they really want to do this, because it would affect, or it could affect, if you go long enough, it could affect the primary calendar we have early primaries in Texas. Our primaries are in March.
Okay.
And so, you've got to get the names on the ballot by a certain time, and people have to be able to, you've got the filing deadlines that open up in November and so forth. And so, if you push back the legislative session to a certain point, then it messes with that entire calendar. And Republicans have to decide whether all of this is worth it. And then also, Katie, as you know, the domino effect of California and New York and other states considering doing the same thing to gain Democratic seats, right? So you start this whole fire that's just a mess in terms of people being fairly represented and politicians really drawing their own constituents and districts rather than having some fairer way of doing it.
Well, and that's the thing. So as we said at the beginning of this conversation, gerrymandering, bad. Redistricting is fine, but the redistricting is supposed to be a representation of the makeup of a particular population in a particular jurisdictional area. I mean, the idea is, why should it not be a reflection of the people that comprise that particular district? Because it just makes sense. I can't imagine the state of Texas not having Latino representation, right? I can't imagine the state of Texas not having African American representation. And we know that the Asians have always been underrepresented in this. But instead of taking the time in this special session, bringing people back in the middle of the summer in Texas to deal with important issues like, I don't know, how to combat the flash flooding that just took hundreds of lives tragically in Texas. Instead of doing that, this is the type of gamesmanship that the Republicans are showing. And let me be clear, not just federally, right, with the Trump administration, but on a state level. It's Abbott and Paxton and that whole crew.
No, that's for sure. I mean, look, we just had these horrible flash floods in Kerr County, of course, where you lost so many folks, but also 2 weeks before that in San Antonio, where 13 people died. And then in Travis County, where I believe 12 people died. And that ought to be the number one priority for this special session for Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and the state legislators. But they have put this redistricting and this gerrymandering ahead of that. And they're trying to hold Democratic legislators hostage. In other words, stop them from trying to block the gerrymandering by timing the session and the voting so that they're holding the flood relief package hostage, to Democratic legislators basically staying there and having to deal with what we believe is an illegal gerrymandering, a new map.
So I've noticed you, Jasmine Crockett, James Tallarico, and others, y'all are actually going around the state, meeting with constituents and other Texans to let them know what's going on. Tell me what your boots on the ground kind of information gathering has been. Are people really paying attention to these issues right now in Texas? Yeah,
I mean, I think that people are living their lives, right? Like they're trying to make it through their day. They're working, they're paying their bills, everything. But, folks also follow the news and check in on it. And I think it's gotten more and more attention. And the people I've talked to, the Democrats, obviously, they are furious. They're besides themselves that this is happening again. When the map is already completely skewed towards Republicans, it's 2-1 right now. And the Republicans that I've spoken to, the politicians, a few of them privately, they kind of roll their eyes that this is going on again. This was not their idea. Again, this is a commandment from Donald Trump to Greg Abbott and the others. But they kind of, a lot of the Republicans, they just feel like a disconnection from their party, because even they realize that right now you should be dealing with the flooding rather than, doing something that one person is asking them to do. And the irony doesn't escape any of us here. I covered that letter that was sent by Harmeet Dillon, the head of the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ right now, with the directive that said that Texas would be sued if they didn't remedy the, quote, problem that was created by these congressional districts that are at issue. And, Dillon is a Trump appointee and somebody who is a known Trump lackey. And clearly, to your point, it's very clear that everything that is happening right now when it comes to this redistricting is being done at the behest of Donald Trump. I am stuck on the reality, which is
the Republican stronghold was the group that created these maps that are now
Right.
being deemed to be unconstitutional and illegal. And the Republicans themselves in Texas, because I covered this. So in Texas, the legislators get together, because people need to know this. They get together to do the maps, and then the maps are sent to the governor for his approval, right? So again, you would think that there would be the active participation by state reps and state senators in Texas in this map stuff. But the absence of the maps themselves, I think, is the biggest tell as to how totally flawed and what a BS operation is going on right now.
Yeah, I testified. I testified. Greg Casar testified, and Sylvia Garcia as three members of Congress last Thursday in that first in-person hearing. And what was bizarre is you're right. They were doing the hearing before they've even presented the maps. I mean, literally, there's no map, there's no plan, there's nothing for us to specifically react to. And I told the legislators, and specifically the Republican state legislators at that hearing, that they are being used. Texas is being used by Donald Trump. And Greg Abbott, their governor, instead of standing up for them and standing up for Texas, is going along with it. And he's damaging the state of Texas, hurting the people of Texas to protect Donald Trump.
Isn't it possible, Congressman, as well, that with this redistricting, or let me use the right word, the gerrymandering that's about to happen with these maps, isn't it possible that some Republicans themselves could become vulnerable to having to run to defend their newly drawn districts?
Well, that's the odd thing is, see, these Republican legislators in states like Texas, whenever they do redistricting, they've gotten used to having some say in what those districts look like. And so they'll go into the Texas speaker's office and say, hey, give me this part of town or this landmark or so forth. From what I understand and what I've heard from a few, or actually several folks now, is that when Donald Trump has talked to the Republican legislators and the leadership in Washington, he's communicated to them and his people have communicated to them. He doesn't care whose Republican career he ends. He doesn't care if a particular Republican member of Congress comes back or not, which for them, those members of Congress, is very jarring because remember, for them, some of them, this is their lifestyle. This is their identity. To them, their career is everything. That's why they've been so, like obeying of Donald Trump and not challenged him or not spoken up in the last few years, because they want to protect their political careers. And now this man is saying basically, look, I don't care if you come back or not. I want 5 seats out of Texas. And if they end up drawing you out of a district because we need to get those 5 seats, then oh well. So they're seething. They're just too scared to say anything. And I mentioned at that hearing last Thursday, I said it's very telling that not a single Republican member of Congress came to testify today. And I don't know, Katie, I don't know if any of them have testified at any of the in-person or virtual hearings that have been held by the Texas Senate or the Texas House. But think about that. Not a single Texas Republican has spoken up and said, yeah, I think it's a good idea that we do redistricting right now. Even the state reps in Texas or the state senators, not many of them have said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think the maps are unfair. And I think that we ought to redo them right now. That just tells you a lot about what's going on.
So while I have you here, Congressman, and it's my moniker, not yours, because I always say this because this is a disclaimer. I call it the big bullshit bill. The big bullshit bill obviously getting passed over Democrats' objection. And, I always, when I speak to members of Congress, I always want to know, what are you hearing about post-BBB passing from your constituents? What are you hearing? Because like I said, I like to think we can walk and chew gum. I like to feel like people need to know, and it's been informative, that everything is interrelated. So much is inextricably intertwined. If you send the wrong people to Congress that are only there to be subservient to convicted felon Donald Trump, then you're going to get something like the big bullshit bill. And that means that your kitchen table issues are going to become even more critically important, but you're not having representation of who you are and what's important to you. So what are you hearing since that BBB has been passed?
I mean, you know, a lot of people really pour their hearts and souls into calling their representatives, emailing them, going to town hall, speaking up against this bill. And while the votes were close, at the end of the day, they passed this terrible piece of legislation. And so people in my district in San Antonio and other people I've talked to across the state, a lot of them are very nervous about losing their healthcare coverage or about a relative, you know, a senior citizen parent who may not be able to get into nursing home care because of the cuts that are coming. So there's a lot of anxiety about that. But you're right. You know, Democrats stood up for Americans' health care. Republicans voted against it. So if you want to know what the stakes are in sending 5 more Republicans from Texas instead of 5 Democrats, that's it. You're either going to send people who will vote to protect your health care coverage, or you're going to send 5 people who are going to vote to take it away. And, you know, as somebody who 3 years ago was diagnosed with neuroendocrine cancer, I tell this story about how when I looked through my long list of bills, there was one line that always stood out, and that's for a treatment that I have to take every 28 days or every month of a drug called lanreotide that's supposed to basically freeze or stop the remaining tumors that I have from growing. And the list price, the first time I saw it on that injection, was $24,000 per shot. $24,000 every time I take it. So if you're somebody who has had their Medicaid taken away from them, or the ACA subsidy that allowed you to get a healthcare plan that where you could afford specialty drugs, which is what this drug is, if you don't have that coverage, then you're probably not getting that treatment every month the way that you need it. And that's one type of cancer, and cancer is one type of illness. There's people with dementia, with sickle cell, with diabetes, with all sorts of heart disease that are dealing with other issues like that and costs like that. So that's what electing or sending 5 more Republicans from Texas would mean, is you've got 5 more people who are going to continue to vote to take away your health care coverage, versus Democrats who are going to vote to keep it.
I'm grateful for you. Grateful to have you. Grateful to see you being in the health and the good health that you are now. Thank you, Congressman Joaquin Castro, for taking the time to kind of ground us in the facts and the reality of this redistricting, and for bringing this home to so many that are tuning in to watch this and to listen, that it's all intertwined. None of this stuff is happening in a vacuum, and none of this stuff is happening in a way that doesn't have an immediate impact on you or a fellow American. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I welcome you to come back at any time to talk about what's happening in DC. Your voice is critical and essential at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And congrats on the show. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.